Hello, everybody, and welcome. This is Tushar Chande. I'm delighted to discuss the Ishaan oscillator and introduce it as a replacement for the relative strength index, which is a momentum oscillator. On the right-hand side, we have daily data for STX and a beautiful strong trend. The middle indicator here is the Ishaan oscillator, which is really positioned as a replacement for the blue line, which is the RSI oscillator or the relative strength index. And observe that the Ishaan oscillator, the yellow line, shone brightly during this entire strong trend, and it was at plus 100. And during the downtrend, it was at minus 100, whereas the RSI rose above 70, but rather unwillingly, then fell below 70, which generally means no momentum or neutral momentum, and then rose again a little bit towards the end here. And then during this downtrend, it was reluctant to go below 30. So the RSI needs an alternative, needs replacement, and I believe the Ishaan oscillator can be a significant improvement on the RSI. A gentle reminder, past performance is not necessarily indicative of future results. Ishaan is the Sanskrit word for the sun, and this indicator shines brightly during strong trends, and it's an oscillator designed for breakout trading. So RSI stands for Relative Strength Index, but it's a misnomer. It's not relative to any other symbol. There's no external reference. It's really an internal reference. The strength here refers to one-day momentum, not relative returns. So again, sort of strange. And it's really not an index. It's not averaged over multiple symbols. It only has one symbol. So it's really time to retire the RSI. More properly, the RSI is the percentage up-day smooth momentum. So if I look at the details of the calculation, it looks something like we first separate the up-day and down-day daily momentum. So the span is 1 day. Then we calculate the 14-day Wilder moving average for the up days. We'll call that by U, and the down days we'll call it D. And this Wilder moving average is a variation of an exponential moving average, but again, it's very a non-standard implementation. And the so-called total momentum is the sum of U plus D, and the RSI itself is the U, that's the up-day smooth momentum divided by the sum of the so-called smooth momentum. So RSI is really percentage up-day smooth momentum. So it's sort of a strange calculation. Now, Wells Wilder designed the RSI before computers were easily available, so he made some trade-offs, and for its time it was brilliant. But today is just weird. The internal smoothing is non-standard, and we really don't need to use that anymore in a computerized world. The 14-day length, which is the default, looks like 2 calendar weeks, but with 5 trading days a week, it's really not quite 3 trading weeks. The lower bound of 0 makes no sense because relative performance of 0 means the same return as something else. Because of these averages, it's really hard to get values above 70 or below 30, and it does not work well for long time periods. It just flattens out. So net, it's rather limited. In the past, I've presented alternatives to the RSI, developed the stochastic RSI, and it's now available pretty much everywhere. And I designed the Chande Momentum Oscillator, and I'll use that as a way to drive the Ishaan calculation. So the CMO is an alternative to the RSI. Right off the bat, it has accurate nomenclature. It has no internal smoothing. It has a scale of plus 100 to minus 100, which is more interesting, but it still uses a one-day momentum. Now here's an overview of the CMO calculation schematic. We use a one-day span and just do the daily price difference. So we get the up-day momentum or down-day momentum. Then it gets separated. So we have two columns of positive numbers. And then we sum up the up-day momentum and the down-day momentum over X days. There's no averaging. So the CMO calculation is directly U minus D divided by U plus D. And this is interesting because U minus D simply amounts to the difference in prices between the start of the period and the end of the period. So there's some direct relevance to what the U minus D or the numerator means. And then the scale is plus 100 to minus 100. So just intuitively, it's a significant improvement on the RSI schematic, even though it sort of calculates or tries to capture what the RSI is doing. So this is what Ishaan stands for. It's internal strength health adaptive assessment number. So the internal means there's no external connection. Strength health implies that we want high values for strong trends. Adaptive implies that the momentum span and indicator length adapt to market volatility, and in this case we're using both stochastic average to range and stochastic standard deviation. And the assessment means that it's an internal reference, not an external reference. And the number just means it's a ratio or a fraction. So just in terms of the nomenclature, it's more accurate than the RSI. Ishaan is essentially a fully adaptive CMO algorithm. The lookback period is varied using stochastic standard deviation. The span for the momentum calculation is varied using stochastic average true range. So Ishaan significantly improves the CMO algorithm. So here's what the Ishaan indicator looks like. We have STX daily data in the upper panel, the Ishaan indicator down below. So during this very strong and sustained trend, Ishaan rose to 100 and stayed there more or less for the entire duration. During this decline, it fell below -50 and stayed close to -100 for the duration. And of course, there was a little bit of chop and a slight lag as STX was consolidating. So it more or less works like an oscillator in terms of what it does during consolidations, but it really shines brightly during trends. So this is the same data as the previous slide, but we've added the blue line, which is the RSI, and the orange line, which is the CMO, and of course this is the Ishaan indicator. Now, if you just run your eyes from left to right, the three lines don't really look like each other. There are a lot of little details that are quite different. At the same time, there's some similarity during very strong trends. But imagine that during the strong trend, we had periods when the RSI was below 70 and the CMO was below +50. So in terms of maintaining and showing the strength of the trend, the Ishaan clearly did a better job. So this is NVIDIA weekly data. The Ishaan oscillator stayed at 100 or close to it during this entire uptrend, whereas the RSI and the CMO were above 70 or above 50 for some, but not the whole uptrend. So this is daily data for the QQQ, Ishaan, RSI, and CMO. If you just glance at it from left to right, during strong uptrends and downtrends, the Ishaan oscillator was clearly at +100 or -100, whereas the blue line RSI and the orange line CMO spent most of the time in the neutral region, not really giving us a clear indication of the trend direction. Now we can do a twist where we can use the Ishaan internals, the variable span and variable lookback, to drive the RSI algorithm. So I've first used the Ishaan to drive the CMO calculation, but I can also use it to drive the RSI calculation. And let's check what that looks like. This is NVIDIA weekly data. We have the Ishaan with the CMO calculation or the Ishaan with the RSI calculation. And I just like the CMO calculation better than the RSI calculation. So I will now use many charts using STX daily data to compare Ishaan to a number of other oscillators. And you can just see for yourself that it doesn't look like any other oscillator. So this is Ishaan versus stochastic. Lots of bouncing around here, but during major trends, clearly it's much more consistent than the stochastic. So this is Ishaan versus Lane stochastic oscillator. During this uptrend, this is very nicely highlighted here. This bounced around a lot and then again responded much faster to the uptrend. This took a while to come up here. And then during this portion of the uptrend, there was some convergence, but then more divergences later on. And the downtrend was highlighted much better by Ishaan than the LSO. So some similarities, but mostly a lot of differences. For example, in this uptrend versus just a brief peak above the reference level. Now, I had discussed that stochastic RSI was proposed as an alternative to the RSI, but the Ishaan is not the stochastic RSI. One just has to look here or look there or look there, or look there. Previous slide had the stochastic RSI with a 1-day span. Here I've redone it with a 5-day span. And even with the 5-day span, there's a big difference between how the stochastic RSI responds to data than the Ishaan responds to data. So here we have Ishaan versus PPO, fixed scale versus open scale, so not really oscillators. We have Ishaan versus the Arun oscillator, some similarities and some similarities here, but you see the lags are quite different, and then the highlighting of the significant downtrends is completely different. Arun versus the AWAP oscillator, some similarities here and some similarities there, but then big differences here, big differences there, so completely different logic. The Ishaan versus the Bollinger Band trend oscillator, maybe some similarities here, but nothing here. Looks very different. Looks very different. So maybe some similarities, but it's certainly here downtrend versus uptrend. So differences in lag, differences in signals. Here I have various oscillators comparing, and it doesn't really matter what they are, but if you just look at what the lines look like, they don't look anything like the Ishaan oscillator. So Ishaan is a replacement for the RSI. It's not the RSI, it's not the CMO, it's not the stochastic RSI, it's not the lane stochastic oscillator, and it's unlike other oscillators. So by design, Ishaan shines brightly during strong trends. It's the internal strength health adaptive assessment number. You can visualize it as a fully adaptive Chande Momentum Oscillator, and it's named for the sun because it shines brightly during strong trends. Thank you very much, and I hope you'll enjoy using it in your trading.